Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Sam Houston Bearkats, who finished 3-9 last season. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 20th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the sports of SHSU on X. He is the co-host of March to the Pod. He does work for their NIL collective Cat Fund. He is Ben Sorrells. Ben can be found at Sports of SHSU on X. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Man, happy to be here. Love the intro. Love the fight song and ready to talk some Sam Houston football.
Well, let's get right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how does one start working for a collective and how long you've been covering the Bearkats?
Yeah, so I've been covering the team for about 3 years now. Started my senior year of college during the national championship run in 2021. Started my social media accounts and things just really kind of exploded from there. Got to make a lot of connections with players and coaches. Love covering the team. And then on the NIL side, because of some of those connections I had to players and coaches at the school, got involved with the collective that launched in January of 2023. And so working in a lot of player relations stuff with the NIL collective. And so been covering the team for a little over 3 years, been doing the NIL stuff for a little over a year and a half now. And love the university, love working for the collective, doing work for the collective and covering these teams.
So we know that Sam Houston has some big plans coming for their stadium. What can you share about those plans and perhaps a timeline?
Yeah, so we've actually got a pretty good timeline now with where things currently stand. So the track removal and turf replacement started mid-May, and that's scheduled to be done by the end of July here in a couple weeks, getting pretty close to that being completed, which is really exciting. And then we do have a timeline of what the construction on the press box in the west side of the stadium is going to look like. So the final renderings are going to be submitted first week of August at the next board meeting that the university has. Groundbreaking on that work is going to start right after the season this year, so late November, early December. They'll play through construction next year. This is going to take a little while, obviously, to completely redo that side, and then the whole renovation of the west side is going to be done before the 2026 season. So work starting after this year, and it'll be done completely before the 26 season.
Awesome. Well, those who are not familiar with Sam Houston State and the offensive scheme they run, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so last year was the first year under new offensive coordinator Brad Cornelson, and it's very RPO heavy. And I think you kind of see that with the two quarterbacks they brought in this offseason and kind of with the personnel they have with a guy like Noah Smith. A lot of jet sweep, a lot of RPO action. I know they're going to really want to try to get the quarterback involved in the run game this year with some of the options they have at quarterback. So that's kind of what I would look for. A lot of kind of quick passes out to receivers in that RPO game, a lot of jet sweep stuff with Noah Smith involved, and really just being dynamic with the options you have at quarterback because they're really dynamic with their legs. I think they're good enough to be able to throw the ball. And I think the offensive line is going to take a pretty decent step forward this year to where you're going to be able to maybe lean into that run game a little heavier. So a lot of options at the line of scrimmage, whether the QB wants to pull it, hand it off, or maybe quick sweep it out to a receiver. And saw a little bit of that last year, got away a little bit from it with how many injuries there were at the running back and O-line positions. It kind of turned into more of a run-heavy offense. But this year, I expect it to look a lot more RPO heavy with some quarterbacks that can run it, offensive line improving, and the weapons you've got at receiver.
Let's get to that position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Last season starter Keegan Shoemaker has graduated. Grant Gunnell and Simeon Evans return. However, Evans has made a move to wide receiver. And then they bring in a pair of transfers in Jace Bauer from Central Michigan and Hunter Watson from Iowa Western. What can you tell us? Can you tell us a little bit more about the Evans switching to wide receiver?
Yeah, on that point, he made that switch full time during the middle of last season, and a lot of people on the staff say he's the most improved player on the entire team. And we kind of saw some of that last year when you really had to dive deep into your depth, and he ended up starting at receiver against Middle Tennessee, had, I believe, 10 catches for 120 yards. And so he's shown he can play at this level, and he's just got even better. So with Evans making that switch full-time last year, it just adds another receiver weapon that you have in that room, which is a room that's already pretty deep.
All right, let's get back to the quarterbacks that will be playing this year at the quarterback position. How did that room shape up during the spring?
Yeah, so there were 3 quarterbacks that split the reps. There in the spring, obviously Jace Bauer is kind of the most notable name coming in. So he's the first one. Hunter Watson did as well, who you mentioned, coming off a JUCO national title at Iowa Western. And then Grant Gunnell was in the mix as well. But it really looks like it's going to come down between Bauer and Watson. Bauer has shown he can definitely play at this level and be a good G5 quarterback. I know last year against South Alabama, that just kind of shows how good he can be at his best. And even when he's not at his best, he's capable of winning games at this level. And then Hunter Watson is the wild card to watch. I think he was probably the best QB this spring, and that's not an indictment on the other 2 guys. It's just showing how good that he played. And so I think it's ultimately going to come down between Bauer and Watson. I think both are very skilled. They fit the system, being able to throw it and use their legs. And so we'll see what it looks like. But if Watson plays the way he did during the spring, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up possibly being the starter.
For those not familiar with Jace's or Hunter's game, how would you describe that game to them?
Yeah, and so starting with Jace, he's a guy at Central Michigan last year who I think he threw for close to 2,000 yards, had 12 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. And so a little unproven with the arm, but great with his legs, had 10 rushing touchdowns, which for a QB that only started, I believe it was 9 games, having 10 rushing touchdowns, it kind of shows how good he was with his legs. And I think he's only going to be able to take a step forward as a passer because he's got 2 years of eligibility left. And it was still pretty early in his career at Central Michigan. And it's kind of the same with Hunter. Hunter's a guy that threw for 2,000 yards and 22 touchdowns with Iowa Western last year, also had 7 rushing touchdowns and 717 rushing yards. Can do a little bit of both, and his game reminds me a lot of Eric Schmid, which is a name a lot of people will know, especially Sam Houston fans. And so really excited about what both bring, and I think they both bring what you need in a Brad Cornelson-led offense, which is a guy that can really man the RPO game well, using their legs, getting it out to receivers, making the right decisions. And so I think whoever is the starter between those 2, you're going to feel really comfortable with.
Let's move over to the running game. The Bearkats' running back room is very youthful. This room is highlighted by the return of their leading rusher from a year ago, John Gentry. Zach Harbeck also returns. He was hurt almost all last year, but then he was the team's leading rusher in 2022. They also brought in Jay Ducker from Memphis at the end of the spring. How did that room shape up in the spring?
Yeah, so Zach Hrbacek was still working back from last year. And I think he's going to be fine. I think he could have gone through spring. He actually went through some of the individual stuff. But he's kind of your speed back. That's what he was used a lot of in the 22 season when the team only played 9 games. But he was really good. So he kind of brings that speed threat. John Gentry emerged as your running back 1 last year, especially with Hrbacek going down. He's kind of a do-it-all back. He can come out of the backfield and catch passes, brings a little bit more pop in the running game. And then Jay Ducker, a guy from Memphis, he's another guy that can do it all. His freshman year at Northern Illinois, I believe he was MAC Freshman of the Year, had 1,100 yards rushing, and then had almost 700 yards rushing his first year at Memphis before missing most of last season with a red shirt and an injury. So I think you've got 3 proven backs there at the running back position you feel really good about. And then some other names to watch is Coco Brown. He started against Liberty last year, the 1 game he played before he got hurt. He'll be a redshirt freshman. And then Adrian Murdahl actually switched from wide receiver to running back last year and did a pretty good job. He started the game against Louisiana Tech last year with a 60-yard rushing touchdown. And so I think you're 5 deep that you feel pretty confident in at running back, which I think you need because last year you were playing linebackers at running back with how many injuries you had. So I think you feel a little bit better maybe about the depth that you have, and hopefully you don't get down to your 7th, 8th, 9th back again this year.
So what should we expect to see in terms of a workload? Is it going to be a a workhorse, a 50-50, 60-40 split, three-headed approach? What are you thinking?
I think it's going to be pretty evenly split. Last year when we did have Herbacic and Gentry, the workload was very evenly split between the two, and I would expect that with Ducker being mixed in. During the spring, it was a little hard to tell because Gentry was the only one of the three-headed monster, I guess you want to call it, a trio of backs that was healthy and able to go through live practice. But I would expect them to rotate as much as they can, just because last year they did see when you put a ton of carries on a guy, they're going to start to wear down. Herbacic got there. He had an injury against U of H. John Gentry, I think he had 40 touches against Jacksonville State. Then a week or two later was out for a couple weeks due to injury. And so I would expect them to try to divvy it up as much as possible. And I think you've got a little bit different styles of play with the three. Herbacic's a speed guy. Gentry can do a little bit of everything and catch it out of the backfield, and Ducker can do that as well. So I would expect it to be pretty evenly split between the three.
Moving back to that passing game, they bring back their top two wide receivers from 2023 and Noah Smith and Malik Phillips. They do lose Avante Woodard to graduation, but as you mentioned before, this group does seem pretty deep. How did the wide receivers look in the spring, and did anyone stand out to you?
Yeah, during the spring, it was interesting. So you've got 9 scholarship receivers, and 6 of them were out the entire spring. And so you had Simeon Evans, Malik Phillips, and Lonnie Adkisson as your 3 healthy guys. And they looked really, really good. Very, very good. And so between Malik, Simeon, and Lonnie, they're probably your 5, 6, 7, maybe 4, 6, 7 kind of on the depth chart. And I feel like if you had to roll with those 3 in a Conference USA game, you feel pretty good. And so I know there's some other names like Noah Smith, which I'm sure we'll get into, but this wide receiver room can go 9, 10 deep if it needs to. And Lonnie Adkisson is a name to watch. He was a true freshman last year, highest rated offensive recruit that we've ever had. And he's taken a huge step forward this offseason, and he might be your 7th or 8th best receiver this year. So wide receiver room is very deep and one that people should be excited about.
So if Day returns, but he got injured last year. Is he fully recovered, and what can we kind of expect from him here in 2024?
Yeah, Ife's going to be good to go. He was a guy in the spring, similar to Zach Herbacic, was pretty much fully healthy, but you don't want to push anything with him just because you know what you have there. And so for the first time in a couple of years, we're going to get to probably see a fully healthy Ife Day, and hopefully we can get him for a full season. Last year, getting hurt in the 3rd game of the year, missing the rest of the season. And then the year before, he was one of the guys that redshirted and only played a couple games. So we'll be good to have him back for a full season.
You mentioned Noah Smith, and I think most of us expect that he's probably the number 1 wide receiver, but maybe that's not the case. How do you see the top 3 receivers shaking out for the Bearkats?
Yeah, I think number 1 is a guy that not a lot of people know, is Qua'Vez Humphreys. So this is a guy 2 years ago at the JUCO level, led the nation in touchdowns. Only played a couple games before he broke his foot. Ended up at Sam Houston, was probably going to be your number 1 receiver last year. And then he re-aggravated the foot injury, but he's fully healthy, ready to go. 6'4", 215, runs a 4.4, 40+ inch vertical. And I think he might be your best player on the entire team. Just a freak athlete. And so you got him at the 1, Noah Smith and Ife Day, I think are your other 2 starters. And so between those 3, you got to feel really good about what you have. And then you've got guys behind them. Like I mentioned, the 3 that were healthy, and Adkisson, Simeon Evans, and Malik Phillips. And then some other names to watch. I mean, Shane Johnson played a decent amount last year. Jay Rockwell played a decent amount last year. You've got some very talented freshmen coming in. And then you also added Michael Phoenix from Kilgore College, who I believe had 700 or 800 yards at Kilgore College last year. So you could go 8, 9, 10 deep at this position. I think it's by far the most talented position on this team.
All right. If you were to describe the tight end usage for this offense to somebody who's never caught a game, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's so the Brad Cornelsen offense, I know I've talked a lot about it, how it's RPO heavy, and that RPO heaviness leads to a lot of 12 personnel packages that the team uses. And so I think the usage, you're going to see quite a bit of 12 personnel, especially now that you've got 4 good scholarship tight ends in the room. And so Elijah Sone's going to be your first one. Going to be pretty heavily featured in the passing game. Only his third full year playing competitive football, and has taken some huge leaps. Was an All-American swimmer before. And so I think you've got a good mix of guys who are good blockers, like Fernando Garza. I believe he's 6'5", 260. You've got Elijah Sohn, who's a really good pass catcher, Thomas Jewett, who's a good pass catcher. And I expected the offense last year to really feature the tight end a lot at the beginning of the year, but we didn't see a lot of it. But towards the end of the year, it really started to pick up. So Elijah Sohn's last 6 games, he had 45 yards or more in 3 of those. Jack Sherrard last year had over 100 yards against Louisiana Tech, which was our second to last game of the year. And then the final game of the year, when we were down to just one tight end, Thomas Jewett, as a redshirt freshman, had 6 receptions. And so once we saw the offense start to find its footing last year and start to figure things out, there was a tight end with 5+ receptions, 50+ yards almost every game the back half of the season. So good to see a lot of 12 personnel with how much RPO they run. And I would expect the tight end to be a pretty featured position this year.
All right, moving over to the offensive line, and this is really unheard of, especially in today's world of the transfer portal. But you guys return all your offensive line starters from 2023. How do those guys look this spring? And, I'm assuming they're ready to go.
Yeah, they are. It was a tough year on the O-line last year, mainly because it was a young group, a lot of sophomores, maybe juniors. Now they're all juniors and seniors. There was also a coaching change at that position, and I think there's been an upgrade in the coaching, so I think that's going to help. New strength coach also came in, and I think they look physically a little bigger. Some of that might just be because they're a year older, but to be able to return your entire starting offensive line and that continuity is huge. So I think they're going to be able to take a pretty big step forward. Last year, they might have been 9th out of 9 in Conference USA. I think if they can be the 5th best O-line in Conference USA, that'd be a huge leap. And I think part of that, too, was Orion Irving stepped in towards the end of the year, started to fill that tackle position. And that's when the offense really started to kind of take off, was the last month. You were scoring 20, 30, 40 points a game, and you won 3 of your last 4. So you could see them start to take a step forward. And if they can just move from the 9th best to the 5th best, I think that would be a huge leap for this offense.
So obviously, they got the starters there, but how is the depth behind them?
Yeah, it was a little shaky during the spring, just because you only had about 9 or 10 bodies, scholarship bodies. You didn't bring in anybody from the portal, but right after the spring, you did add two more linemen, a guard and a tackle. So you added Luke Eckerd, who was the starting left tackle at Iowa Western with Hunter Watson. So you added him, and then you added Mishley Joseph from Coffeyville. So I think you feel a little bit better about the depth. It was definitely a concern this spring, but I think now that you've got 8, 9, 10 bodies you can rely on, you feel a little bit better. But we'll see how it shakes out in training camp. It was a concern during spring camp, but I think you feel a little bit better now that you've added 2 quality JUCO guys.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who are you picking?
Definitely Qua'Vez Humphreys. I know I mentioned him a minute ago. Was probably going to be the breakout guy last year. That's who I was tabbing as the breakout guy all last offseason before he re-injured that foot. But I think it's definitely going to be him, and I think he has a chance to be one of the better G5 receivers in the country. Just seeing what Noah Smith can do, I think he can elevate even beyond that. And so I would probably go with Qua'Vez.
All right, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball and talk about the guys up front along that defensive line. They lose a couple of good ones, and Akeem Smith and Chris Scott, both of them out of eligibility. But despite those losses, they have a good core of guys coming back with a fair amount of experience. How did the defensive line shape up this spring?
Yeah, so starting on the edge, edge looks really good. I mean, Javon Leon is back. He's kind of the big name that everybody knows. Isaiah Nixon is back. He kind of plays that hybrid position. Then you've got some other names like Jaden Phillips, Bryson Hayes, Seth Mason on the edge that are going to be good. You mentioned some of the guys on the interior that we lost. That was a big pain point this spring because you didn't really have a true nose or guy that can play on the interior. And so that was a problem. But right after spring ball, they addressed it. They added 4 defensive tackles in the portal. You added Quincy Wright from Oregon State. You added Cordell Pat from the JUCO level. You added Denver Warren from New Mexico State, and then you added Marcus Moore from North Texas. And so 4 guys that I think are ready to play at this level. And you really address a need that was pretty apparent during the spring. I think you were good on the edge, pretty lacking on the interior, but we hit the portal hard, and I feel a lot better about the interior. We'll see how that playing time shakes out during the training camp.
Who do you feel needs to step up most in this room?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be guys on the interior. It's under a new defensive coordinator in Skylar Cassidy. We played a lot of 3 down front in the past, and so you're going to be relying on the interior a lot more. You're going to put at least 2 of them out there at front or at a time. A guy like Marcus Moore had 20 plus tackles at North Texas last year. He's proven and experienced at this level, so he's a guy that's going to have to probably step in and be a leader there on the interior. Because I think you feel good on the edge. You have good pieces on the interior, but they're going to have to step up and prove it. So probably Marcus Moore is the biggest name that to watch for, and the guy that probably needs to step up and take a big role this year.
The linebacking group lost their leading tackler from 2023 and first-team All-CUSA defender, Trevor Williams, who ran out of eligibility. Williams about doubled the number 2 tackler on the team. Williams was pretty much just a tackling machine out there. While Markel Perry played a lot on the line, the roster had listed him as an outside linebacker, and he is 2 out of eligibility. They bring back its second leading tackler from 2023 in Qua'Vez Gaither. He was their leading sack getter, and their leading sack getter, Isaiah Nixon. How did the linebacking group look in the spring?
Yeah, I thought it was good. Qua'Vez Gaither is kind of in that leader role now, was the WAC Defensive Player of the Year in 2022, was also good last year. And so I think he's going to take another step forward and kind of be the leader there. Some other names to watch, I think Trey Fields is a name to know. He's a guy that I think has had the talent and ability to play, but it's been such a loaded room the last few years. So I would look for him to play a lot. Sincere Jackson, kind of the same thing. He's been injured and has had guys ahead of him, but I think he's super talented. You added Chantavius Johnson from Memphis very recently at the linebacker position, and so I think you're going to be able to replace Trevor kind of in the aggregate between Qua'Vez and those 3 other guys. And then I think Isaiah Nixon's game models Markel's very, very similarly. And Markel did miss a couple games last year, and Isaiah was able to fill in really, really well. He was a guy that contributed at Texas State before he got to Sam Houston also. So I think the room's going to be okay. Obviously, losing Trevor Williams is a big loss. The leadership of Trevor Williams, I think, is a big thing. But I think Trey Fields getting a shot, Sincere getting a shot, Isaiah Nixon hopefully taking another step forward. I think the room is going to be okay. Doesn't have the names or maybe the talent that it did before, but I think it's still good enough to compete at this level.
So moving over to the defensive backfield, they lose DeMarcus Crosby after the spring over to New Mexico State. Isaiah Downs and Donovan Adkins have graduated, and those are some big losses. But you do have some guys coming back like Caleb Weaver, David Fisher, and Devon Armstead, among others, coming back here in 2024. How did the defensive backfield shape up in the spring?
Yeah, it's going to look a lot different than it did last year. There's a couple guys, like you mentioned, Caleb Weaver's returning. He's kind of a nickel guy, nickel safety. He's going to return. David Fisher was one of your starting corners last year, and he'll be back. But those are the 2 guys from last year that we saw a lot of that are returning. Saw a little bit of Davion Armstead, but he was hurt most of last year. But he'll be back. So him and Fisher are your top 2 cover corners on the outside. Weaver's going to be playing safety. And then you've got Jalen Jimerson, who you brought in from Liberty. He was a big piece of that Liberty secondary when they went to the Fiesta Bowl last year. So he's going to have a big role. And then you also picked up Nyquil Hawkins from Virginia Tech. He didn't play last year, but in 2022 was really good for Virginia Tech. And so those are some of the names to watch. Also picked up Jalen O'Neal from ACU, who's a super talented kind of younger kid who I think is going to be pretty good. And then another name to watch at corner is Chanson Prox, redshirt freshman. He was all CUSA freshman team last year. He's another corner to watch. So it's going to be a lot of new faces this year, some coming up from the depth that we had last year, some are transfers. But I think it's still going to be a pretty good group, and I'm excited about what they can do this year.
All right, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Yeah, I mentioned him a little bit just a second ago. I'm going to go with Davion Armstead. Played in 3 games last year, and was very, very good when he played. Had multiple pass breakups at BYU and against New Mexico State. Only played a couple games due to injury, but looks physically very impressive this spring. 6'1", 6'2", great size. Has put on some good weight, it looks like, this offseason. And when he did play last year was really good. So I think he's a guy that could really be a shutdown kind of all-conference corner this year for Sam Houston, and I think he could be the breakout guy.
With spring practice now over, which position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning?
Yeah, I think it's probably I'm going to go the interior, the D line, just because you have no idea how it's going to shake out. I like the pieces, but you're not too sure. And then probably the secondary as well. Not that I don't like our pieces. It's just a lot to figure out going into the spring. And so, or going into the summer training camp. I like our talent at both positions, but just don't know how it's going to shake out. And there's a couple guys that you brought in that are going to have to contribute. And so I love what we have on the offensive side. Offensive line is all coming back. Feel good there. Feel good about our skill positions. Good at quarterback. I think it's the defensive side, just some of the unknowns, like our pieces, but just a little unsure of how they fit in right now.
Is there any particular position you think they might still be looking at in the transfer portal, or do you think they're pretty set?
Pretty set. Yeah, I know they've offered 1 or 2 DBs recently. I know they offered, I can't remember where he's from, but he was a FBS corner recently. They offered him this last week. And so have thrown a couple offers out to DBs recently, but team is pretty set. But I think if they add anywhere, it's probably a DB.
All right, Ben, what would you say is the main strength of this team is?
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because the past 2 years have been really rough when it comes to getting the ball to skill players, but I think it's your wide receiver position is by far your most talented position. Phil Steele had us as the second best receiver group in the league, and I don't even think that included Qua'Vez Humphreys, who I think could be your best player on the team. So I think the biggest strength is probably your skill positions, most specifically at wide receiver and what you have there.
All right. I'm looking forward to answer this question because, being involved in NIL, you're going to have a much different perspective than the people, most of the people we've talked to in the past. So when it comes to recruitment of new players and retention of existing players, how has NIL and the transfer portal impacted Sam Houston?
Yeah, it's made a big impact in a couple ways. One is I think it's highlighted the culture that we have here, and because obviously knowing what we're giving to players, obviously we're not competing with Texas or A&M or LSU, but we haven't been hit that hard by the portal. Noah Smith is the only all-conference receiver in Conference USA to not leave their school. And so I think the culture has shown that it can be enough to hold on to players. But also when it comes to NIL, there are needs that people need. And so it has become something that you have to have, especially in the transfer portal at the G5 level, to get guys to come in. And obviously we're not recruiting guys that rushed for 2,000 yards last year or put up 15 touchdowns at the receiver position. But to be able to get quality players out of the portal, you've got to have something there to kind of show, hey, if you come play here and you produce, there's a chance to earn money. So I think, one, it's shown we haven't been hit that hard by the portal, even though we don't have the money that a Texas does, and our culture matters. But also you need to have something to show players that, hey, if you produce here, there is opportunities to earn money. So trying to find that balance at Sam Houston. I know there's a lot of creative ways to be able to value players academically, NIL, sponsorship deals, brand deals, and we explore every avenue we can just to be able to compete and be competitive at this level. So those are some of the things that we kind of try to highlight, and I think part of why we've been so successful, despite not being the most well-resourced G5 or Power 4 kind of team.
With your involvement in the NIL, is there anything you can, share with us in terms of, what's the most frustrating part? Seems like the rules change like every 6 months? And is there anything like the average fan like just misunderstands totally about collectives?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts, obviously, like you said, the changing legal environment, what is and what isn't legal, how involved you can be with the university, what you can and can't do there. I know the IRS stuff that came down a little over a year ago was a big change for us because we were close to getting 501c3 status, but obviously the IRS went away from that. So that's a big part of it. And then I think also just some of the numbers that get thrown around, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Players saying they're getting offered X by, and this is nothing revolutionary, but they say they're getting offered 10,000 by one school, and they just make it up to try to drive the price up on another school. There's a lot of that going on, and I don't think that's breaking news, but I have seen that a few times with different players being recruited by Sam Houston and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's an ever-changing landscape, what you can and can't do. What's legal, what's not legal, wanted to do it the right way. And then also there's just a lot of smoke and mirrors, I think, with recruits. And that's part of the game. I mean, a lot of stuff is still unregulated, and a lot of that stuff is bound to happen.
Well, it seems more and more like the demands of the head coach are really turning into more of a general manager type role between the recruiting of, seniors, player retention as soon as this, during the season and after the season happens, and then fundraising and less of the X's and O's. Do you see that trend happening at Sam Houston State?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's been a big push. And I know recently we brought back our football auction, which really was a big push and something we hadn't done in 5 or 6 years. And so a lot of the staff members, along with the head coach, helped put that together to help raise money for the program, whether it be NIL, just general fundraising money, academic money, nutrition money. And so it definitely has become a big part of the job, is going out and making sure you have the funds to be able to compete at a high level, whether it be the food you feed the players, the NIL that you're giving, the academic money, whatever it might be. It's definitely turned into a fundraising job as a part of it. And I don't think it's just for the head coach too. I think it's for a lot of the support staff members as well.
What does success look like for the Bearkats here in 2024?
Yeah, I think for myself and a lot of the fan base included, I think making a bowl game would be considered success. It's a team that was 3 games away from a bowl game last year. You went 3-9, but you very easily could have been 8-4. And I think this is a much more deep and talented roster. And so I think a lot of fans are expecting 6-6. That's what I'm projecting us at. I think 6-6 is kind of where we land, maybe 7-6 after a bowl game. But I think success this year would be making a bowl game, and that's what a lot of people are expecting from the Cats this year.
Is there anything else that you want to share or think that we should know about this 2024 Sam Houston State Bearcat football team?
Yeah, not too much. I don't think we hit on specialists, but you returned the same specialists as last year, so nothing too much to talk there. I think it's a team that's a lot deeper than it was last year, really across the board. I think the talent level's similar, but a lot more depth, which I think a lot of fans saw is a really key thing at the FBS level, and it's something you have to compete. So, yeah, really excited about what this team could be. I think 5-7 should be the floor. Maybe 7-5 is the ceiling. Yeah, and I'm expecting a bowl game this year. That's kind of the hope and the thought.
All right, Ben, we want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and to share your knowledge. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here and happy to talk about the Cats.
All right. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you are listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.